It was the summer of 2017, just a few short months before my senior year of high school. Thanks to my parents and my part-time job, I had a pretty decent collection of Pokemon games, but up to that point, I actually had not completed a single one. So, that summer, I made the decision to beat every single mainline Pokemon game that I owned and see which one I liked the best. I'm a Gen 3 kid, so I knew Pokemon Leaf Green or Pokemon Sapphire would probably be my favorites, but after the credits rolled on my 7th game, it was the recently released Pokemon Moon that came out on top. With all those games now under my belt, I still had a craving for Pokemon. At that point, I knew a little bit about the unofficial online system for competitive Pokemon, but all the different tiers and formats were really overwhelming for me at first. So I just looked at my favorite Pokemon, Sableye, saw it was in the PU tier, and decided to play that one. Gen 7 PU is probably the format I've spent the most time playing, and definitely the only format I played while it was new. I was never that good at it, but I did think the tier was pretty cool, so I'm going to talk about it now. For those who are not aware of the unofficial 6v6 competitive single battles metagame from Smogon.com, let me briefly explain what PU is. The Smogon metagames are split into several different tiers, and the most popular tier by far is OU. OU lets you use almost every single Pokemon in the game. That seems great, but the downside is Sableye kinda sucks. To remedy this, Smogon made some tiers below OU, and how it worked in Gen 7 was, if Sableye didn't appear on at least 3.41% of all OU teams, it would drop to the tier below OU, UU. This number is going to be important later. Repeat that process 3 more times, and Sableye would end up in the lowest official tier at the time, PU. As you can imagine, after filtering out the best, 200 or 300 Pokemon in a given generation, PU has historically had a really low power level, with tier-defining heavy hitters like Duosion and Minun. But Gen 7 gave us enough power creep that even PU got a lot of new tools that I think make this tier really cool. Number 4 on the viability rankings, but number 1 in my heart is Eelektross. Eelektross has always been funny to me because while most high-ranked Pokemon need to consider a lot of factors when picking an item, Eelektross always runs the Assault Vest because it cannot bring itself to give a shit about any other item in the game. You would think Eelektross having no weaknesses would make it a really good defensive Pokemon, but the big problem with it is that Pure Electric also has almost no resistances. Assault Vest lets it kind of fix this, so now it can switch in on most special attackers and start whittling down your opponent's defenses. This became even more true later in the generation, when people realized that you should just drop Thunderbolt to make room for Knockoff, because Knockoff is the best move in the game. Eelektross actually has a surprisingly deep move pool, so you can tailor a lot of its coverage moves to fit your team. Then, ideally, you can get a nice slow Volt Switch into one of your cleaners, which is usually a fighting type. For most of its time as a current generation, Gen 7 PU was defined by 2 fighting types. Which one you were using, and how you were going to counter the opponent's fighting type, was a big part of team building. And 90% of the time, my fighting type of choice was Primeape. It's got a really straightforward set, which is nice because I like clicking buttons. You click Close Combat or U-Turn 95% of the time, and then you have 2 other moves too, I guess. Choice Scarf makes Primeape the best revenge killer in the tier, and its attack is high enough that if you don't have any fighting resists left on your team, the game is going to end very quickly. Choice Scarf, being by far the most popular item on Primeape, also had the unintended effect of it being really easy to run a different item on it and just bluff that you had Choice Scarf. But that also means you're putting a Pokemon on your team that has no defensive utility and no speed control, so proceed with caution. The other main fighting type of the tier is Girder. Unlike Primeape, Girder is a slow and bulky setup sweeper. It can work as a bit of a defensive pivot, since unlike Primeape, it can actually switch into things. The big move here is Mach Punch, which lets it check Hail teams, Shell Smash fossil Pokemon, and other things that can threaten a quick setup sweep. Girder's main problem is that it's pretty weak without setup, but just like Primeape, Girder excels in late game scenarios, where it has Bulk Up and maybe even Guts, boosting the power of its Drain Punch to make it feel just fucking unkillable. Throughout the generation, these two were thought of as more or less evenly matched, but right now Primeape is considered pretty firmly to be the better of the two. Girder isn't even the second best fighting type in the tier anymore. That honor goes to Crabominable. But I've never used Crabominable, and I don't really like looking at it, so we're gonna stop talking about it now. Also, Hitmonchan is in this tier, in case you wanted a fighting type that doesn't win you the game, but does learn Rapid Spin. Stealth Rock is a move that has been pretty much mandatory on every single Battles team since the move was introduced. This means a good portion of every tier's identity is going to be about which Mons are the best at clicking that move, and in PU, you've really got two go-to options. Mudsdale is the best Stealth Rocker in the tier. I always thought it was pretty cool in the actual Sun and Moon games. Its signature ability, Stamina, gives it a defense boost whenever it's hit by an attack, which sounds really good, but I think wall breakers in the higher tiers are just too strong for it to really come up, especially with Z moves. But in PU, the power level is low enough that Stamina actually lets Mudsdale check physical threats you wouldn't expect it to, at least once or twice. Mudsdale, Eelektross, and Primeape is a really standard bulky offense core that I used all the time in this tier. The other really good Stealth Rocker is Regirock. It's considered a little worse than Mudsdale because, unlike Mudsdale, it loses to fighting types, and it doesn't block Volt Switch. It's probably a little outdated by now, but it's wild that the recommended stat spread for Regirock, a Pokemon whose stats look like this, is still mostly focused on boosting its physical defense, entirely so that it can survive a second close combat from Primeape. But the reason I think that stat spread is probably outdated, and honestly the reason I think Regirock might be a little underrated, is because compared to Mudsdale, it is better against the Pokemon that almost got banned. A little bit after Sword and Shield released, there was a push to ban 2 Pokemon from this tier. It fizzled out pretty quickly, so I don't expect them to ever actually leave, but it took me by surprise because I never really used either of them. I'm not good at the game. Drampa is the easier to explain of the two. Dragon types are really good. PU doesn't have that many dragon types for that reason, but out of all the ones left, this one clicks Draco Meteor the best. This is a problem, because the 2 types that beat Dragon, Steel and Fairy, are also really good, so we don't have any of those either. The search for Dragon resists is so dire that the best Fairy type in the tier is a Pokemon with no item and no ability. Silvally is probably the Pokemon that would surprise the most people if you told them it was a legendary. Silvally is like if Arceus was an iPad kid. Like Arceus, it needs to spend its item slot and ability slot in order to change typings, but unlike Arceus, its signature move is kind of weak, and also the item it uses doesn't boost its attack. Now, you might think that because Gen 7 was the generation to introduce Silvally and introduce Z moves, they would let Silvally use Z crystals to change its typing. Silvally has base 95 in every stat, which is pretty good for PU standards, so with a good typing, Silvally can still accomplish a lot. In fact, the Steel-type Silvally is so good that we don't even get it. Silvally Fairy can work as either an offensive pivot Pokemon, or a setup sweeper with Swords Dance and Flame Charge, and it uses the fact that it blocks Drampa and resists Primeape to get in safely. And the second best Silvally form in PU, as you might expect, is Silvally Poison. Silvally Poison loses its Dragon immunity, but gains a Grass resistance, and importantly a Toxic immunity, making it more of a defensive mon that beats other defensive mons. Its Poison-type Stab and strong Fire-type coverage make it a good answer to the Ferroclef defensive core, that being Ferroseed and Clefairy, of course. The other Pokemon that almost got banned from PU for being too good was Simisear. I know a lot of you were worried that this video might not get to talk about Simisear, but don't worry. Simisear is really good in Gen 7 PU. PU, historically, has always had a problem dealing with any fire type stronger than Monferno. In Gen 7 alone, PU tested and banned 5 fire types, and Simisear could have been the 6th. This seems kind of strange because unlike Dragon, Fairy, or Steel, fire isn't usually considered a good type in singles. And usually it's not. But you know what is good? Bulky water types. So the upper tiers scooped up all the best bulky water types, and we're left with Lantern. Funnily enough, Simisear was actually considered worse than Monferno before Gen 7, which really just shows how good Z-moves are. You gain the ability to pretend, for one turn, that you are not using a Pokemon whose best move is Fire Blast, and whose second best move is Grass Knot. I actually really do like looking at the PU ban list because you get to see how few traits a Pokemon actually needs to just be busted as hell. We've already talked about typing, but this also extends to moves. Like, did you know they just printed Quiver Dance and thought it was okay? Lilligant is the banned Pokemon I remember the most vividly because the combination of Sleep Powder and Quiver Dance on a Pokemon with a speed stat was so crazy that it didn't even matter that its best coverage move was Hyper Beam. This means Quiver Dance is effectively banned from the tier, with the next best answer being a Pokemon that speed ties Regirock, and Sleep Powder is also quite rare. Victory Bell is one of the best mons in the tier, and it has access to Sleep Powder, but it actually has better shit to do, surprisingly. The physical set really doesn't want to drop Swords Dance, and the special set usually doesn't want to drop Strength Sap. Have you read Strength Sap, by the way? That move's insane. An Intimidate drop and a full heal. I bet the Quiver Dance guy came up with that one. Part of me does wonder if Lilligant could come back, since Simisear and Drampa became these big prominent wall breakers at the end of the generation, and they naturally beat grass types. Drampa in particular has Sap Sipper, so you can't even Sleep Powder it. That thing is like custom made to dunk on grass types with bad coverage. But on the other hand, like, who would want a strong setup sweeper with Sleep Powder running around in the tier? This does actually raise an interesting question about Turtonator. I know a lot of you were dying to hear about Turtonator, but if the best wall breakers in the tier are a Fire type and a Dragon type, then Fire Dragon is probably the best offensive type combination ever. And Turtonator was version exclusive with Drampa, so both of them have the same base stat total. And Turtonator even has a crazy setup move in Shell Smash. This thing sounds like it could be bannably strong, but I remember it being mostly overlooked back when Gen 7 was the current gen. So let's just take a quick look at its stat spread. Oh dear god. The more I think about this tier, the more I realize that Skuntank just has that sauce. Skuntank is kind of a low-tier legend. It's never been OU, but every low tier that has Skuntank is made like 30% cooler because of it. That's because its typing and move pool make it a really versatile offensive support mon. This is kind of the standard Skuntank moveset, and before I get to listing off all the different moveset options it has, I just want to point out one option it doesn't have, which is Knockoff. I know I said earlier that Knockoff was like the best move in the game, but Stab Knockoff might actually compete with the real best move in the game, Scald. Knockoff on a Dark type has over 140 base power. It removes your opponent's items. It like folds your laundry. If Skuntank learned Knockoff, it would always run it. As it stands, you can change around a ton of Skuntank's moveset and still have it perform well. Of course, you can drop your Poison Jab for Crunch and still be working with pretty much the same set. Or if you drop Defog for Taunt, you'll be running the same set, but cooler. If you wanted to drop Sucker Punch, Skuntank actually has a really good Choice Scarf set. I like this one because it lets Skuntank really flex both of its strongest stab moves. Smogon recommends in your last slot you put Defog or Punishment, whatever that is, but I like running Explosion there. It's not like ghost types are ever switching into you. And if you wanted to drop Pursuit, Skuntank can also work as a special attacker. The main benefit of this set is that you can easily fit in Fire Blast as a coverage move and obliterate the steel types that normally switch in for free against you. I've even splashed Fire Blast onto Skuntank's physical sets once or twice for that exact reason. And there are a couple more niche options that I can see being used if you find the right set for them. Skuntank's stats are kind of bad, and it doesn't learn any good setup moves, so it can't really take over a game in the same way other Pokemon can, but it's a good progress maker, and it can slot itself onto a lot of different team structures. Completing our Dark Fighting Psychic core, we've got Mesprit. Mesprit for a long time was considered the best Pokemon in PU, and kind of the glue that held the tier together. Its main set was this defensive Stealth Rocker set, which ticks a lot of boxes in the team builder, and sparks no joy. But Mesprit is a Pokemon with good enough stats in PU that it can get away with a lot of different sets. Its Choice Scarf set was probably the next most popular build, followed by Choice Specs, but the Calm Mind Farium Z set was the really scary one. A couple players thought that this set might be the thing that finally breaks Mesprit, because it can combine the bulk of the Stealth Rock set with the ability to actually kill things, but we never found out because on the final tier shifts of Gen 7, Mesprit rose to NU. It's been a few years, so pardon me if I get a couple details wrong, but from what I understand, it all started when Uxie rose from NU to RU. Alright campers, it's time for your second lesson in Smogon tiering. So every 3 months, Smogon looks at how much each Pokemon is used in each tier. If they drop below that 3.41% usage in the current tier, then they drop, or in this case, if they rise above that 3.41% usage in the tier above where it currently is, then they move up. This rise means that Uxie has been immediately banned from all NU tea parties and will be shot on sight. This creates a cascading effect where now that NU has lost Uxie, NU players start looking to PU for any similar Pokemon that might be able to drink Uxie's chamomile. And Mesprit looks absolutely parched. I never played Gens 8 or 9 competitively, but I do know that Mesprit, which was the best Pokemon in PU, leaving PU at the very end of Gen 7 was a big enough shock that Smogon actually decided to do something about this cascading tier shifts problem. So what they did is, they changed the usage cutoff rate from 3.41% to 4.52%. And PU was never screwed over by tier shifts again, I assume. Also, I think it's worth mentioning that Uxie wasn't even good in NU. Like, it wasn't unusable, but if you were to name off every Pokemon in Gen 7 NU from best to worst, you would be talking for a long time before you said Uxie. So it should be obvious that an even worse version of Uxie would be really terrible in NU. That is, unless you have a Trick Room team and 1100 ELO. Yeah, one of the biggest flaws in the usage-based tiering system is that Smogon doesn't consider the skill level of whoever is picking each Pokemon. And I never played Gen 7 NU, but I'm pretty sure that NU just had a really high density of low ladder Larrys back then for whatever reason. There were so many that some people at Smogon wrote an entire article listing off all the Pokemon in NU that are really bad and that people should stop using. Actually, they wrote 2. But the final tier shifts of the generation were not all bad, because we did get Torterra right at the end. That makes Torterra one of the less explored Pokemon in the tier, despite being really obviously good. Having a grass type that Drampa and Simisear can't switch into is so threatening. I like capitalizing on that by either threatening a sweep with Rock Polish, or just being a big stupid wall breaker with Swords Dance. Both of those sets recommend that you use the Gracium Z item, so that Torterra has a harder time killing itself with Wood Hammer, but I do think that there's a lot of room for experimentation in that slot. Right now I'm looking at Yachi Berry because ice types are pretty popular. Ice is probably the second worst typing in Pokemon, but unlike Bug, Game Freak actually lets most of its ice types have at least some stats. So ice types are pretty common in this tier, and can make their way onto most team structures. I already said before, but Hail is actually a team style you need to pay attention to in the team builder. It's the best type of weather team here, because Drizzle and Drought are both banned, but Snow Warning is legal and has 2 fully evolved Pokemon that can use it. It's worth noting that Aurora Veil is also banned because Hail would be genuinely fucking unbeatable if it had that. You don't usually see full Hail teams, but it's not uncommon to see a duo of a Hail setter plus a Lowland Sandslash as your Slush Rush sweeper. Because Game Freak decided to give the ice type 5 fucking weaknesses for some reason, no matter which Hail setter you pick, you will be doubling up on multiple quad weaknesses, either to fire or to fighting, which is why I was never huge on that playstyle. But by playing Hail as just a side engine, you allow yourself to use Jellicent as a way to offload some of that pressure. But if you thought ice types were limited to offense, you'd be wrong. Bucko. Articuno is perhaps the scariest Pokemon to see on a stall team if you're using a Mudsdale, since it can just come in every time you try to set up rocks and blow its vape smoke in your face, and there's nothing you can do about it. And this concept of a legendary ice type that's actually pretty hard to get rid of if it denies passive damage was something I did try to explore with one of my favorite garbage Pokemon, Regice. Listen, I know I was just complaining about NU spamming terrible Pokemon, but at this point, the Gen 7 metagames have been out of date for 6 years, Jesus Christ. So by using terrible Pokemon, I'm only disappointing myself. Plus, Regice is even on the viability rankings. See? See? There it is. The only set most people consider is a Rock Polish setup sweeper, but I liked leaning into its natural bulk with a Resto Chesto set. Oh wait, I was supposed to talk about Pokemon that matter? Right. Jellicent. Jellicent is the other S-tier Pokemon in the metagame, and the one that I have conspicuously not mentioned until now, because, like, it's a bulky water type. What do you want me to say about it? I heard it clicks Scald really good. Alright, that's a little reductive even for me. Water and Ghost is a really good typing, and having reliable recovery is pretty rare in this tier. It has some viable offensive sets, both inside and outside of Trick Room, but I was never a skilled enough team builder to find a spot for those sets that I was happy with. Jellicent really loses a lot of splashability with the offensive sets, which exacerbates the one big problem with Gen 7 PU, in that it's really tough to build for. For anyone who hasn't built a competitive Pokemon team, there are two basic components to it. The first one is to pick out a good win condition for your team. Pick Choice Scarf Primate, I like that one. The second component is figuring out how to stop your opponent's win condition from beating you first. That part's the hard part, because it forces you to think about every single decent Pokemon in the metagame that your opponent could use, and make sure that you don't get secretly whooped by one of the better ones. The cutoff for how many decent Pokemon you need to worry about isn't really a hard number. That amount is probably going to change a lot based on like how good you are at the game or some shit. But for me, the cutoff was always C tier on the viability rankings. If it's B- or higher, I need to have some idea about how to handle it. For Gen 7 PU, that's about 65 Pokemon, which is a ton. To give you some perspective, if I apply that same criteria to the other tier I've spent a lot of time on, Gen 3 OU, that list is about 20 Pokemon that I really need to care about. I don't think that Gen 7 PU is necessarily an unbalanced metagame. I just think that's the natural result of Gen 7 having so many little critters. The trade-off for having a ton of options to beat your opponent is that your opponent also has a ton of options to beat you, which is kind of fucked up if you think about it. But despite that, I do still really like this tier. Gen 7 is an old gen, but it doesn't really feel like an old gen. It's got Team Preview, and it's got those same 3D models the Pokemon Company has been using since the 3DS released. But despite its flaws, I do really like the extra options that being a newer gen gives it, like the wide move pools and the item variety. It's also nice that the tier has a decent offensive slant to it, and that's not just because it's the generation with Z-moves, but it's also because the really splashable defensive Pokemon tend to get filtered out really quickly. So you can still put up a decent defense if you want to, but it is tough. Silvally Poison, being as good as it is, makes a lot of sense when you realize that most defensive Pokemon in the tier are vulnerable to Toxic. And in Gen 7, fucking anything can run that. And if you want a good defensive ability, like Magic Guard or Regenerator, you need to run kind of crappy pre-evolved Pokemon, which compared to their fully evolved counterparts are way more passive and way more vulnerable to knockoff. Holy shit, it really is the best move in the game. And that's it. That's the most I can monologue about a competitive Pokemon format. So, if you want to hear more about competitive Pokemon, subscribe to Reverend.